So welcome back, everybody. We have this nice, tight group. I think I now know everybody in the room, which is wonderful. The whole point to this morning's panel is about putting together your A-team. When Coleman came and talked with us for FDI 201 back in, when was that? April? April. He was really talked about some of the things most economic development organizations already know is you have to have an A-team ready. And so on our panel, we have Coleman Pfeiffer from Ernst & Young. We have Teresa Nortello, who spoke with us yesterday from Nortello Consulting Group. And now we also have Rose Olia from the Asian American Community Exchange. And so all the three of them play a vital role when you're looking at economic development and foreign direct investment from outside the US, because there are all these other pieces that we don't think about. We're all good at talking to people who want to come in and put a Best Buy in our town or build a subdivision, but when it's a company making a large investment in your state or in your community, things change. And so I'm going to start and having Coleman talk about, what it was like to corral the infrastructure team to start thinking about this, both projects really, Hybro and Foxconn, and what was that like? So that's
perfect. So I'm probably going to focus on compiling the team for Hybro, just because that team ultimately helped. It was like the foundation of the Foxconn team, because like I said, that was the biggest project we'd ever seen coming in originally. We were a little bit lucky in that project in that there's a lot of opportunity right now in Kenosha. Some of that is thanks to Northern Illinois and some of the Illinois politics. But there's been a lot of businesses looking to expand or relocate over the border. So the way that we developed that team was, some of it was by project demand, in that we worked with the county, CABA, which is the Kenosha Area Business Alliance, quite frequently, to where we have a very well working relationship with their president, Todd Battle. And we have a trust now with them, or the state has a trust with them, and the Milwaukee 7 regional group. So through really just practice of a lot of deals and a lot of projects, we are very comfortable of when the project comes in from the state level, when we transfer that, whether it be the region or the local, and who's going to lead that project. And that's really the key is, whose project is it? And when you identify that it's no longer your project, it's now a local project. Most FDI is going to come in through the state and say, we like this part of your state, and the state will reach out. And at that point in time, it typically is the state that leads the conversation, leads the site selection and the tours, and kind of spearheads everything. There's a natural transition where it starts to become, I'm liking this site, I'm liking this community, and it's now your project to win with our support or the state's support. Part of that team, as the projects got larger, grew into energy, utilities, water, and you started to identify people you could really trust and count on, that if you said, I need an answer by Friday, you were going to get an answer by Thursday, with high predictability and reliability that what they said was actually doable, especially in the government world. I mean, I get asked incentive questions when I was with the state. I can give you a ballpark, but at the end of the day, Secretary Mark Hogan is the one that's going to sign it. So if I give you a number, is that credible enough to where you're ultimately going to get that number? And do I have the ability to throw out a number, which I earn the trust to be able to do that? You find people on your team that can also do that for either the local municipality, the county, the workforce, and you slowly work with these people on a number of projects to where you feel comfortable pulling them in. Where it becomes a little bit more difficult is when you get a county or a municipality where you don't get a lot of projects. So I'm going to say the northern part of Wisconsin, due to less population, just less opportunity for a lot of companies coming in there, and you get introduced to counties that you maybe never have worked with before, and you're forced to either rely on or identify who in the county you should really work with, or the municipality. Some of that is word of mouth, in that the energy companies cover a great territory and can say, I have a guy or a lady that is really good and we can count on her. Some of it, you're taking a chance and you're going to micromanage a little more the first time, and as you get more comfortable. And there's also opportunities when you're at state conferences to meet some of these people, and you start to get to know them personally, and you start to understand whether or not they're a person that you would want to work with, can work with, and can trust. the technical ability is obviously super important, but I also think the character and the ability to hang out with the person is incremental, because a Foxconn example, you spend a lot of time with those people. And that project specifically, there was a lot of changes. There was a lot of frustration. There were days where you were literally banging your head on the wall, like, we just did all this work and it meant nothing. If you can't sit back and kind of vent to that person and then laugh about it and like share a drink and just be like, we're gonna get through this, right? It's gonna be a tough person for you to work with on your team, because you're gonna spend a lot of hours together, a lot of nights. Oh, Surrey doesn't understand. So I mean, there are some cases where it's really easy to identify your team, and then there's some where it's a little bit harder just because the amount of deals that are going through. But ultimately, it's people you want to trust and that you believe are going to deliver when you need the product.
Great. Now the next question goes over to Teresa. And I think, Teresa, with some of the things you've been bringing in is much more on that data-centric role. And I've had a lot of wonderful discussions with you over the last, almost a year now, talking about how much data drives decisions. And as we're talking with different communities, I don't think necessarily they have the real data that they need to work on larger deals at their fingertips. Yeah. And so why don't you talk to some about that?
So as data becomes more democratized, meaning it's available for the common man and not held in proprietary any longer, it's driving more of the site selection decisions prior to coming to the local communities. So I would say at Statebook, and I'm an advisor to Statebook International, we kind of throw out a number, and I think it's pretty accurate, that about 90% of site location decisions are driven by that data before they even get to your community website. So the decisions are being analyzed and vetted and all that way up here, and then as you know, they make the short list. But what they used to get off your website, they can now get through data democratization. So the things that I would encourage for you to keep abreast of that they can't get is a lot of the workforce data, the training data, and that's where they find the value at the local level. So they'll come to you looking for that information so that they can then run their reports and analytics and then do their cost comparisons on which location based on the labor component, the wages, the availability and the quality of the labor force. So yeah, data is driving a lot more decisions. And if you aren't able to keep your data current, you're really going to be behind the game. So I would encourage you to find ways to keep that data current. Because if they go and they look at your website and it says, 2010 census, they're like, okay, wait a minute. Another thing I would say, if we have more time.
Yeah, we have a good time. This is all about a good conversation and getting some things out.
And data, again, to drive that point home, is the sophistication of the economic development role is changing dramatically. So data is data, the Internet of Things, and just big data in general is disrupting a lot of what we typically had done in the past on economic development. And the reason is because the level of understanding and your sophistication on communicating on an industry level with, say, an OEM or a Foxconn or another, like a data center or maybe a pharmacy-related company, the data and educating yourself on those target industries within your community, if you're not keeping abreast of those industry trends, when someone comes into your office and says, I want to open up a 200-person food company here, and you're not able to identify the labor that they need right off the bat, nor if you're not able to talk their language in their industry, it really is a detriment to your credibility. So I would really encourage you to get more analytical, definitely, as an ED person, and understand your industry mix, not only how to attract them, but what is their supply chain, what drives them, what are their pain points, and just really get educated on those industries. And data, again, it's available, it's out there, there's so much out there right now, but you can educate yourself appropriately for those industries that you're targeting.
And one question before we go over to Rose on this is something that we were talking about earlier the year was speed to reply to RFPs.
Oh, yeah. So, so RFI turnaround, when I started about 20 some years ago in this business, was, I would say, at least 3 to 4 weeks. You would get an RFI and you'd have 3 to 4 weeks to turn around. Now it's 2 days. 2 days is a good turnaround. And so if you're not only if you don't have the up-to-date data, but if you don't have the ability to turn those around in 2 days, you are off that list, immediately, obviously, because you don't have the ability to turn it around. So having that accurate data feed and being able to pull that data quickly is huge.
Okay, great. Yeah, because this leads into where I was going to go with Rose, because as we are looking at bringing, opening up the markets, and a lot of the world wants to be in the Chicagoland area, I think all the EDOs in the room kind of understand how to work American company to U.S. government. The cultural shifts and thinking about getting your A-team together is starting to understand the cultural influences of the different folks that are coming in. Later today, we're going to have Dr. Gatto talking about Germany, and Rose, you're going to talk a little bit about Southeast Asia and the cultural and aspects of that, because how they negotiate, how they look at deals, what they want in a community also drive decisions. So if Rose, you can talk a little bit about what you do with the Asian American Community Exchange, and then how EDOs could probably really benefit by understanding culture when they're responding to these RFPs.
Right. So usually cultural understanding and behaviors is that one component that's the hardest to measure, right? Because you can get the best infrastructure, you can get all the data, and ultimately it is about how much money they're going to make and you're going to make. But when you are competing against other municipalities that have equally the same kind of infrastructure and data, it's the cultural component that will make the difference, whether they will choose you or not. And that's what we do. My business partner Alice is here with me, and we work in the Asian community in the Chicagoland area, but we also have a network of hundreds of communities across the United States. And so when you're approaching these foreign direct investors, and our specialty obviously is in the East Asian and South Asian areas, the way that you're gonna pitch to a Chinese company is not gonna be the same as you're gonna pitch to an Indian company, right? And those are usually the two largest requests that we get. Sure, if you look back at their cultural behavior, they have many, many similar characteristics, but how they got those is different based on the history of their country. And that's something I think that you guys as EDs could learn to appreciate when you're trying to pitch and pull together something and approach these foreign direct investment. And the way that we typically do it is by you kind of leveraging the Asian communities that you have in your municipality. Now, if you're, a municipality that has a very low Asian turnout, then I would say we would kind of shift it around to where you emit the values of that foreign entity. So if it's China and you don't have a large Chinese population in your municipality, what are the top 10 cultural behaviors that would trigger them to say, wow, we really like this because it aligns with our values? And then the same for India or Cambodia or Vietnam. And part of it is history of their country, but it's also understanding their cultural norms. So it's not just about when to bow, when to give your business card, which restaurant to go to, if you can speak the language. Those are just top of mind or top of, that just touches the surface. But if you really have an understanding of their background and their culture behavior and not, confusing Chinese values to, Taiwan values, like China and Taiwan, that's, especially not only politically sensitive, but culturally sensitive as well. As you'll see, even in the Chicagoland area, they have two very separate camps. Then you'll have a better chance of getting over that edge that might compare you against other bids to say, okay, they really did, they do care and they did their homework about us as a customer and wanting to get our business.
Yeah, and I want to, if you can pass the mic down to Coleman, because I want to hear a little bit with some of the things you talked about during your breakfast keynote, getting your team on a flight to get to Japan, and then you're working with a Taiwanese company in Japan, and talking about that work ethic and some of the things of starting to understand how a Taiwanese company operates at scale, and those type of learning curves that you had to go through from a cultural aspect.
Yeah, I think, so I'll kind of backstep of when you're developing that team aspect. A key piece I did not mention I should is there's private business owners that you can call upon and that are part of that team, right? So in the Foxconn case, they met with the chairman and president of We Energies, Rockwell Automation, Northwestern Mutual. They had a dinner with probably 12 of the top CEOs of every Fortune, I think 1,000 company in Milwaukee, just to talk about business and the work ethic in Milwaukee and the ability for the state to follow through and the local communities to follow through, and really kind of pitched the message for us. But it was more to qualify what we've already been telling them over and over. And they also spoke to the workforce component. I bring that up because that trip to Japan was, they used the Northwestern private jet to get there. So that's really using your business partner, because there was no commercial flights that could get us there when they needed to be there. Mm-hmm. So using the community partner and a good business that wanted to see this business come in, they lent the state for a small fee their plane to get to Osaka. I think one of the things I've continuously heard while I was not on that trip, but has continually stood out, and if you ever hear anyone from Foxconn talk about it, this usually comes up. It's the work ethic that the team, when in Osaka, showed the Taiwanese and the Chinese and the Japanese teams, that they were willing to work just as hard on the project as they were all working. They were willing to get off a plane after 16 hours of flying, probably not looking their best. And they jumped right into the project, started talking about families and how they were all doing, talking about the plant, the logistics, the wastewater management. I think they really showed the work ethic, and that gave the chairman at least the confidence that Midwestern work ethic is real. It isn't just something we hype. It is different than what they've experienced on the East Coast or in other countries like Brazil. And I think that had a huge piece of it, that while we don't have the culture of a lot of that different ethnicity in Milwaukee, mm-hmm. We were able to show that we can mimic the work ethic that they would demand out of their employees within scale of U.S. acceptable policies, right? A standard work week in China, I think, is 6 days a week, 10 hours a day, if not more. That's not going to happen in Wisconsin, especially not in the summer. So we had to explain that to them. But I think we were very upfront, we were very honest. But we did show we are willing to work as hard as you work to get this deal done, and our employees, or the people of Wisconsin that are going to be your employees, are going to mimic the same behaviors with a high quality.
Yeah.
And I think that ultimately spoke very loudly to the chairman.
Yeah, and yesterday when we had a panel, had a person from the German American Chamber and the JETRA, and they were talking about for site selection, how important local cultural schools were. I didn't know that there was a Japanese school in Arlington Heights, and then there's a number of German schools in the Chicago area. Do you think over time, Coleman, there's going to be some almost like a mini Chinatown or Taiwanese town happening in Milwaukee or somewhere in these regions, because there's going to be this influx of culture, and I'm not necessarily sure how all that's going to pan out over the next 5 years.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, within Wisconsin, there's a lot of German immersion schools.
Yeah.
There's a rich history of that culture. I think it ultimately depends on who they ultimately hire at the plant, and if they bring in a lot of expats that come back or are, I'm going to say, borrowed from their plants in Osaka in China
Right.
to help train up. I could see that. I definitely can see schools offering more classes on the language, on the written form, both formal and informal, and being able to communicate, because I think with Foxconn, you're going to get a lot of their suppliers, and it's going to open up a lot of trade opportunity and exporting with Wisconsin. I wouldn't be surprised if Racine did not put a type of school in, whether it's Taiwan, China, Japanese, but I would not be surprised if they have something that is more of an international school within that Sturt event kind of area. I could easily see that.
Great. And I want to pass it to Rose, because a question on some of this, and basically 2 nuggets of differences between Taiwanese and Chinese, because Taiwan is the parent for Foxconn, but they have large factories in China. If there's different ways of thinking about it or different ways they do business, maybe you can speak to a little bit of that.
So one thing I wanted to add comment is there's a huge Hmong community in Milwaukee, because a good friend of mine is the ED for the Hmong Chamber of Commerce, and that would be another avenue you could also explore, because Hmong is very, they live like in Milwaukee and in Wisconsin and Minnesota areas. Yeah, Wausau especially, yeah. In terms of Taiwan and mainland China, that one really is more politically based, and the history between the two nations that you have to be sensitive with. It's not really, in that case, it's not the culture in terms of cultural behavior. They're very, very similar, because at one point, mainland China, and they still say that Taiwan is part of mainland China, but then Taiwan kind of, went their own direction, or wanted to be independent. And that more is on understanding the political ramifications. Their cultural behaviors are very, very similar. And as Taiwan becomes more and more independent, you'll see them kind of fragment from what mainland China ties very tightly. The biggest advantage you have to understand those two is how big is your Chinese and Taiwanese community in your municipality. China is the largest, but you'd be surprised when we kind of tie Taiwan and Chinese together in the numbers. When I'm looking at so I actually visited a dozen of your municipality websites and looked at your demographic information, and a lot of you just point to US Census, which is probably smart, but a few of you did actually try to do some. And for Chinese, some of you segmented it and some of you didn't. So if I'm, a Taiwanese company that happened to be looking on your site, and which they'll have younger reports doing, and they notice that, they notice those kinds of things. And so the safe way to do it is just to point to the census, but if you really do an effort, I would always segment mainland China and Taiwanese. And if you can, I would even try to do language, because Mandarin is the national language, but there's more Cantonese speakers. It's like if you went to Chinatown right now in Chicago, 85% of them speak Cantonese, not Mandarin. They know Mandarin, and writing is the same, but language-wise, they prefer Cantonese, and if you can't speak Cantonese, they kind of put you in this category already. In Naperville, though, where there's a large Chinese community, it is Mandarin, because they're a different class of people. So that's the other thing, is understanding not only the cultural behavior, but the class system for the Chinese specifically. The ones who live in Naperville, most of them came here to do expat grad school, right? The ones who live in Chinatown, they immigrated here and don't have, very high education. They're like from the poorer countries. And so when you're trying to, but I could tell you when the consulate visits, the Chinese consulate visits, they are rock stars in Chinatown. But when Taiwan visits, they're not as, they're welcome, but not like rock stars. But in Naperville, it's the reverse. So you just kind of have to do a little bit of homework because with Chinese and Taiwan, it is a little bit more involved. And we can definitely help you with that.
Great. And then Teresa, if somebody is now, we're hearing about data, we're hearing about workforce, we're hearing about a lot of things that the EDO should really have on their website. What would be a kit of parts? How would they go about doing that?
Well, Rose just touched on it as language, and there is data out there, and Statebook has it, that identifies the languages spoken in particular MSAs. And example is we had DuPont approach us out of Michigan, and they were looking for a location where there was a high German-speaking population. And so because of their request, we actually went out and got all of that language data and were able to show them where those large populations of German-speaking people were. And based on that, they had a location project. So I would encourage you to add that. It is available. Again, it's a public information. So that language ability is really important, as Rose said.
And talk, Teresa, a little bit more about some of the site selection experience you have. And as people are coming in, a lot of the municipalities in Chicagoland are, I think Coal City's got 5,500 people. Green Oaks is 3,400 people. Where they still have these economic development departments, how do they start getting beyond, the local pocket realtor to start understanding how to recruit things?
Well, I think, again, as things change, and Coleman talked about developing a smart city, collaboration and regionalism is really going to be the play in the next 3 to 5 years. If you are not working with a regional partner on your infrastructure, on your AI type activities, the reason being is that smart cities and all of this technology is how the Department of Transportation, both at the state and the U.S. level, that is what's driving infrastructure. And so if you are behind that curve, and because of the cost of it, you're going to be left behind if you're not collaborating and looking at a regional development. So how does that tie into development? How does that tie into brokerage? And how does that tie into locations? Being able to have that high level of technology within a reach of a 30, 60-mile drive is going to identify where the future sites will be. And a lot of that is being driven by Amazon effect, if you want to call it that, the IoT, Internet of Things, last mile delivery, drone technology. I mean, you name it, that the technology, the advanced technology is driving development, and it's driving companies to identify their next play in locations. So the site selection process is really, again, it's being disrupted. E-commerce, they're looking at drone hub for last mile. So in this particular area, the industrial warehouse distribution space is almost completely built out. The vacancy rate is very low. And so they're looking further and further out along the industrial pipeline, I-39. So they're looking at that area. They're looking further west on 90. But what they're looking at, because they need that last mile delivery or they need that technology back into the city, is how are they getting product from that far out west back into the infrastructure and back into the transportation modes. So all of that advanced technology is playing a lot in the development phase, both on the development side and the company side and the EDO side. So.
Yeah, so it'd be fair to say that as the EDOs are looking at things, not only they have to keep their current constituents happy, they really need to start, starting to research where things are coming the next 5
Exactly,
years,
yeah,
because
yeah.
it's completely new.
Yeah, and as you look at, and again, the further build out of O'Hare, that's going to and this hyperlink from the Chicago market down to O'Hare, that's just one of probably 4 or 5 major projects that are in conversations in this area about how do we leverage this AI, and it's really a fascinating conversation. If you get a chance to get on any kind of Chicago metropolitan planning, if you're able to get involved in some of those planning conversations, you will hear this a lot. So it's a very fascinating, forward-thinking type
Great.
conversation.
Yeah, question for Coleman. Now that you are outside of the state and now working for Ernst & Young, what are some of the things that you're seeing changing? Because you were very much Wisconsin focused, and now you're much more regional focused. So what have you really noticed in the last 4 months?
Yeah, I think there's definitely been a bigger presence of FDI, of companies looking into the U.S., whether it's to expand into or it's their first trip into the U.S., and that's in an area all over the U.S. It's not like they're just going East Coast or West Coast or Midwest. They're really looking to put a footprint physically here. There's probably a number of reasons, from tariffs and the threat of tariffs all the way into the growing economy and the cost of doing some of the labor in China is changing. So we've definitely seen an increase in the interest in the U.S. We've also seen a fair amount of just regular expansion within business from West Coast into the East Coast and looking to expand. There's a lot of money that is being put in play. The economy is doing well. Employment is growing, and companies are trying to figure out where their next location is going to be to take advantage of that. So they are, and to Teresa's point, they have access to a lot of the information. So one of the things that we see is that by the time they come to us for our assistance, they've done a fair amount of homework.
Right.
We are more or less confirming what they've already found, and they're giving us some information, even on incentives and demographics, which is typically what we provide for them. So they've definitely changed the game a little bit in that they just have so much more knowledge because it's out there. I mean, there's so much data available. It's not, can I find data? It's what do I want to know, and how do I use the data to tell a story? And the companies definitely understand this. They're more in tune to it.
Right.
And they're using, I think, the consulting firms and the professionals in our arena more for confirmation.
Yeah, you want to follow up on that? Yeah.
Well, I just want to add, just in what you talked about, the changing economic landscape when it comes to U.S. policy and trade, and being able to stay abreast of that, not on a very high level, but understanding how these new changes in policy, specifically, are we in NAFTA, are we out of NAFTA, are we in TIPP, are we not, and the tariffs and all of that, knowing your supply chain, so understanding the business impacts of these changes and this disruption on your existing businesses. If you're not in your existing business's door in the next 2 to 3 months, you're really not paying attention, in my opinion, to what their needs are. Harley-Davidson is now talking about moving their operations out of the United States because of the tariffs. So how does that translate into supply chain and all of the tariffs that are coming in on steel and import, all of the imports? So find out, I would really encourage you to get in front of your existing businesses and find out what does this do for them? And that uncertainty is going to drive the next 6 months to a year, and we are hearing from the Fed about a possible recession. Now, it's not totally in the cards, but inflation is going up. They're looking at, I don't know if they're going to raise rates again, but they talked about it. So we are at full employment the economy's growing, but there's going to be a ceiling at some point. And so I would really encourage you to get in front of your companies and find out what are their 3 to 5 year plans, and how are these plans being affected by these changing policies at the federal level.
Yeah, and kind of for all three of you too, and kind of going back to the purpose for this panel, which is about that A team. And when we started, I was thinking about your A team and how you respond to RFPs, but Teresa, you make a good point, is that A team that you put together is got to meet on a regular basis, because you just brought up the retention aspect. And the EDO is leading the retention piece. I know one of the things that I do in Waukegan is I was put on a special mayor's ad hoc committee that talking retention. So we meet every 3 weeks with the planning department and 5 business owners, and I chair this committee, but we are feeding these, I'm concerned about this,
Right.
I'm concerned about that. And what's wonderful, and then bringing some of the capacity that Rosa's team has is talking about cultural issues and understanding that, if you can grow that slice of the pie and make it more amenable for recruitment and retention. So it's basically putting together a full kit of parts. But I know a lot of people here have real big questions they want to ask everybody. So I'm going to open it up to questions, and who wants to be first on this? Don't be shy, because I know everybody had whispered in the background. It's like, I want to talk about this. I'm going to pick on Ellen. I want you to come up with something. Okay,
While you
great.
guys think of questions, some behind the scenes Foxconn. So Rose spoke about culture and just knowing what you're getting into so you understand. When we didn't have a lot of time to research the Taiwanese business culture or the Chinese business culture for that matter before our trip. So when we flew out to DC, the first meeting, the way that we sat people, they actually met in the Oval Office because the chief of staff is from Kenosha. The way that they sat the people, the chairman of Foxconn, Chairman Go, spoke to the Secretary of Administration as if he were the governor for a good 35 of the hour meeting, and was directing questions at Scott Neitzel, not Scott Walker, until about halfway through the meeting, Secretary Hogan of Economic Development kind of pointed out, like, this is the governor. When they did introduction, it was so fast, and the way they sat, they didn't put the most important person on the left side to face the chairman. He sat in the middle. So it took him a little bit. It actually turned into a very positive relationship building point, and that they joke about today. The other example of just not understanding how business discussions are done always, when they went to Japan, the culture, at least the culture of the chairman, and Rose, you can maybe confirm if it's the culture of how business is done. When you're eating a meal over there, you don't really discuss why you're eating. So you eat, and then you talk. Okay, so if you've never met Governor Walker or seen him, he is a chatty dude. The guy likes to talk. He likes to talk Packer football. He's a sports nut. But he's a very common person. Like, if you saw him, you didn't know he was the governor, he's just a very normal guy. And he talked, I think it was for 45 straight minutes, because the chairman wouldn't respond because he was eating. And he's looking at the rest of the table like, like, we're bombing here, right, guys? And at the end of it all, one of the people come out and they go, when it's time, when you eat your meal, it's rude to talk with your mouth full while you're eating. So we eat, and then when we're done after 15 minutes, then we discuss. And it was all small chat, but the governor felt compelled to keep the conversation going and just kept talking. And it was like he was talking to nobody, and none of us from Wisconsin understood what was going on until after the point, and then somebody kindly mentioned that when he comes to the United States, that when it's food time, you eat, you don't talk, you just get your meal done, and then you open up for discussion.
So with something like what Rose's team does, would that have been helpful, having somebody whispering protocol as in those early stages?
I think having time to do some homework, especially in a country like Taiwan where we have not had a lot of experience as a state, would have been extremely helpful to hire a company. The difficulty we had is that we were given 48-hour notices every time.
Oh, yeah.
And by the time we would have gone through the governmental process of procuring a firm, the project was done.
Okay.
But in most situations, absolutely.
Yeah, because you know, I just got back from Select USA from last week, and year over year, it's the third year I've gone. Our team has gone for 4 years in a row, and the large amount of South Asian countries there. You had Cambodia, Bangladesh, India, China, Taiwan, Japan. You know, just the cultural explosion from 3 years ago to this year was just insane. So I think as putting together that A team, and if you're going to be doing foreign direct investment, is definitely worth having a lunch and starting to engage some things. So I still want to bring it back to questions. I mean, I know a lot of you wanted to learn some more things, so, oh, you thought about one, yay.
Comments and I guess some questions. First of all, I think the A team, thank you for putting this panel together, because I think just knowing that there are resources out here, both from the data and the cultural perspectives, and the site selection, this sort of becomes our A team, and we know, who our resources are to call. I'm in very, very northern Illinois, so I'm with Boulder, Gurney, very, very far north. And one of the I think challenges I'm just always curious to get into the heads of. So the Wisconsin Economic Development team is very vertically integrated. And I guess I'm sort of curious from your perspective, having come from that world, as you look at Northern Illinois, and all of Illinois really, what advice can you give us in terms of putting our A team together on a regional basis to get in there? The story that I always, it sort of gives me nightmares, but I'll share it. I had a company that was looking to expand. Heard this after the fact. And when they made that fact known to the Illinois delegation, they got a couple people that, came to their office and had a conversation with the president and so forth, and that was nice. But then when they made that known to Wisconsin, they had 10 people show up in the office of the president and a call from Scott Walker the next day. So I think those are the kinds of challenges that we in Northern Illinois need to figure out how we work together. And frankly, I know a lot of what Wisconsin does very well, so I'm curious if I can have a little glimpse into that world.
Yeah, I mean, I could go on and on about this. So I think part of there's just a business perception right now, right, with the unfunded pension funding in Illinois, and Wisconsin's 100% funded. I never thought I'd talk about pension funding in my job ever, and it is like a major topic when talking about future stability of a government, especially in FDI. When Harbaugh signed up, they wanted us to sign a letter guaranteeing the political foundation of Wisconsin. And it's like, not America.
Wow.
Like, we're going to have an election in a year and a half, and the guy might be out, right? So that pension became a major player, though, and that being 25% funded in one state and being 100% in the other made them worry. I think the one thing WEDC has done well, so they basically mimicked Indiana in their economic development. What is it, Indiana Works, I believe? We've divvied up our state into 9 different regions where we have specific regional economic development directors in those areas to work on business expansion and community development. So they get to know their communities really well, because instead of covering a 72 county state, they get to focus on 9 or 10 counties, and you get to attend all the meetings, and I get to know the municipalities. And then they hired someone like myself to do attraction for the whole state, because there's not a whole lot of attraction that takes place every day compared to your local municipality. So I think the key is having someone with the state that knows the individuals within the communities, within the county. So when a project does come in, they know who to contact within the state government. From there, it's really a leadership thing of how bad are we going to go after this to win it. The governor of Wisconsin is very proactive. Getting him to make a phone call is really easy. You fill out a form, you explain what the situation is, you tell him what you want him to say, and he basically verbatim hits the bullet points. He's pretty amazing in terms of the politician part of it. But it's a leadership thing from Governor Walker through his cabinet down through the economic development team, that if we need the secretary to be on board and it's going to be 50 jobs, that's just as important as 13,000 jobs. So I think it's a cultural thing, but it starts with having that local resource with the state right there to hear your complaints or hear your ideas or hear your opportunities, and to really drive that up the food chain as far as we need to take it to win the business. But I would agree, we have the governor, he called a lot of businesses, 10 jobs, 20 jobs. He goes to their groundbreakings. He's very welcoming, and maybe that's because we have a Republican-controlled, government all the way through. So it's a unison and they're not playing party. I don't know, but he's,
Cava, explain Cava is one of the.
CABA is the Lake County Partners of Kenosha.
yeah, yeah. So, and then above that, you have a Milwaukee 7, which is a regional EDO that's funded through private donations. They help kind of regionalize things. Here's the growth. Here's where we're seeing it. We can give you some regional data. We can get the big businesses to come and have dinners with you. CABA is more your local group. We know our sites very, very well. We know the local real estate teams very well, and our local footprint in terms of workforce very well. We all, I would say in that area, just because we've done so much. But most counties within Wisconsin have a very good relationship with the state. And I go back down to they have a local person that they get to see monthly, if not every couple of weeks, so that it's not like it's a new person to them. They know them all by first name. They know their backstory. They know their family story. It's much more personal than just doing business with a state employee.
Yeah, and some of it in Illinois is a function of scale. I mean, with the population of Wisconsin is roughly 4 million, 6 million?
I think it's like 6 to 7.
6 to 7. And just the Chicago metro area is 6 to 7. And while DCO is separated in, I think, 7 or 8 regions, you have 3 guys responsible for Metro Chicago. How they can, interface with all the communities at that hyper level it's got to be a real hard stretch to do. And Teresa, you might want to be able to.
Well, I would just say, the realities in Illinois are obviously starkly different than the political realities in Wisconsin. But you're starting to see, Ellen, economic developers and leaders and business leaders really kind of revolting against that quagmire of policy and stalemate at the higher levels. And so we're seeing economic development groups say, okay, we have this reality, we have the budget issues, we have the political issues. How do we get around those? And how do we, and it's not leaving the leadership behind, but it's just leading from below and saying, you're not leading. Let's pull together a leadership team and show you what we can do on a regional level. And so you have the new...
The CBDG or whatever.
Yeah.
It's trying to be the Milwaukee 7 for this area.
So we have a new group. Anybody know the full name of it? It's called the Chicago Regional Growth Corporation. And
They needed a name guy.
Yeah, so they are this group I'm talking about, trying to get around the political realities. And, whether it succeeds or not is another question, but the point is there's that frustration bubbling up from a lot of areas. And so I think we're starting to see movement in that area because of this organization and because of Intersect Illinois and because of some of the other things. And Select Chicago is a perfect example of trying to have development and momentum apart from the leaders that seem to cause the problems, if that makes sense. But so you're seeing a lot of bubbling up of that frustration. And so hopefully with the Chicago Regional Group and Select Chicago, we'll be leading it instead of them who put the brakes on in a lot of ways. So
I do see momentum, and having Mark here yesterday was fantastic.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
What a great
yeah,
symbol.
yeah. So
Great. Any other questions? I want to be cognizant of Coleman's time because you gave me pretty much half your day, so I really appreciate that. Great. So we are wrapped for putting together your A team, and I want to thank our panel for coming up and spending their time with us today. So nice round of applause for them.